Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 15, The Pale. We only found bones. Dusty and Sickle led the way through the compounds. He moved smooth and swift, his rifle tracking over any threatening doorways or windows in the cobbled-together buildings. She trotted along, clanking and rattling as if she owned the place. The time we had spent in scouting the raider camp, through a reasonable precaution, had been meaningless. There wasn't a single living being within the walls. I had been the first to see the bones lying within. It was the first time we had taken advantage of my abilities. The ridge above the mine was surrounded by rocky slopes and cliffs, but I simply slipped around to the far side and flew up. I was so close when I peered over the edge that I didn't even need my binoculars to scout the place out. That's when I saw the skeletons scattered around the area. When I had rejoined the others and passed on what I saw, we decided to move in. The silence of the raider camp was as oppressive as it was unexpected. But what really confused and concerned us as we passed among the skeletons was the lack of any sign of violence. Well, there were the signs of death and grotesquerie in abundance, as one would expect of a raider camp led by a pony named Psycho. Skulls and other bones were lashed to the front wall, a caged-in circle in the middle of the yard was stained with blood, and a pair of decaying pony pelts were hung like banners before one of the buildings. But the skeletal remains showed no obvious signs of violence. Several crows still lingered, but they hopped and flew away lazily, as if largely unconcerned by our presence. They'd already picked most of the meat from the bones, and it seemed like their actions were the only reason the skeletons weren't perfectly intact. They looked disturbingly peaceful. Once we'd ensured that there were no living ponies, we looked closer at the bodies. Their barding and gear hung loose around their bones. None of the bones were broken. None of the barding was pierced. The ground beneath them was just... It wasn't stained with blood. Their weapons lay beside them, and one of the two firearms we found, an automatic pipe rifle and a rusty bolt-action, neither of them had been fired. They had just fallen to the ground with full magazines and loaded chambers. It was as if the raiders had simply just dropped dead. So that was a little unnerving. We had entered the main building, a crude shack built into the entrance of the mine, when Sickle approached one of the skeletons, cursing.
Fuck. That's gotta be Psycho. Some fucker killed that bitch before I could.
I assume she identified the raider by the rather distinctive barding the former pony had worn. A thick metal chest piece that had a fan of 4 spikes across the back, each with a pony's skull impaled on it. Another skull head straps bolted onto it, resting loosely above her own skull. A sledgehammer with a blade welded on lay beside her. We continued on. The raider's structure extended a fair way into the entrance of the mine, eventually ending with a door, bolted shut on our side. We opened the door to briefly check the other side, then closed and bolted it again. We expected the mines to run much deeper than we cared to explore. Returning, we did a quick search of the compound, and it became immediately apparent that the place had not been looted. Sickle accumulated a small stockpile of chems and booze, and we turned up a fair amount of food, water, and even a small stash of caps. It was nothing really significant compared to what we already had loaded in our wagon, but it was something. I have to admit, I found myself a little disappointed. While I was satisfied that these dangerous raiders had been removed, I had wanted to be a part of that solution. Arriving to find them all dead felt almost as if I had just been cheated. It was absurd, I told myself. Practically speaking, our objective in coming here had been achieved, one way or another, and it had required no effort or no risk on our part. Now, emotionally speaking, I recognized that I had sought some form of retribution, whether for the lives these ponies had taken, or the harsh introduction to the wasteland that they had inflicted upon me. It was unhealthy and unproductive thinking. Sickle, she took it a good deal worse, and she spent a good few minutes kicking at walls, demolishing what had once been Psycho's home. The rest of us had gathered in the courtyard, looking at a few of the skeletons laid out there. At least a week, Dusty said, nudging a skull with his hoof. Maybe longer.
How did they die?
Starlight asked from a bit further away. I don't know. Dusty circled slowly around the body, looking over the bones. Maybe it was your alicorn friend. He hadn't been too happy to hear that we had first seen the alicorn around here. Our recon had been as much to make sure that she still wasn't there as it was to get the tactical appraisal of the raider camp. Sickle stuck her head out a hole and she kicked in the wall.
Whoever it was, I'm gonna beat the fuck out of them!
Her head withdrew, followed a moment later by the loud clang and smash of her armored hooves kicking something heavy and metallic. We moved on as soon as she was finished tearing the place apart. It was already late in the evening, and we wanted to put as much distance between us and that place as we could. It was early the next day when the questions inevitably began to flow.
So, what was Appaloosa like during the war?
I looked up from the pip book to look over to Starlight. She had lent it to me so I could read through the data we had downloaded from Paradise Beach. Reading while riding in the wagon was a lot easier than reading while walking, but the motion made my head feel fuzzy, if I kept looking at it for too long, though I didn't mind the distraction.
It was nice enough,
I said with a shrug.
There were a few thousand ponies living there by the time I moved in, and a good deal of the rail traffic went through the town. The ponies were nice enough, even if there was the occasional tension between them and the buffalo. You didn't see much of the war then?
I shook my head.
No, I was a long ways away from it. Not my field. I saw the occasional military train coming through with the troops or tanks, but that was it. The Zebra military never really came near Appaloosa. If not for the arms factories, the news, and the visits from the ministries, it might have been easy to forget that there was a war going on.
She slowly nodded.
That sounds kinda nice. Yeah.
We continued on, the wagon lightly bouncing as it rolled across the dry earth. Sometime later, she asked,
Did you ever meet one of the princesses?
I actually laughed, though quietly.
Thank goodness, no.
To her surprised expression, I explained.
They were ancient and incredibly powerful beings that we didn't entirely understand, and their previous encounters with changelings had been less than ideal. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they developed magic to let them recognize a changeling on sight. I'd rather not take that chance.
Soon, the questions became more like a game.
Okay. Favorite pre-apocalypse pastime? Toss-up between reading and lazy conversations with friends.
I smiled.
Those holes in your legs, are they normal? Yes. So, all changelings have them. Why? I might as well ask why ponies don't.
I shrugged.
We just do. Best place in Equestria. Before, you know. I always wanted to see Cairnchalot. The pictures looked amazing. I'm not sure if I would have the courage for it, though.
Several more casual questions came as we traveled, until she hit one that gave me a pause.
Which princess do you think was better?
I blinked, taking a moment before replying.
I have seen that question start fights, though that usually involved alcohol.
She snickered, but stuck to her guns.
You didn't answer the question. Well, there's not much of an answer to give. Mind, my impression was entirely second huff, but they each seemed like they had their own strengths and their own flaws. They were both decent, I guess, just from a distance.
She nodded, thinking on that before asking.
Okay. How about the ministries? You said they visited Appaloosa? Yeah, and I try to stay as far away from there as possible. Mostly it was just the Ministry of Wartime Technology, which wasn't so bad. I saw the Ministry Mayor Applejack a few times, though only from a distance. The one that scared me the most was the Ministry of Morale.
Starlight laughed.
What? The Pinkie Pie is watching you ministry? Yeah, those posters are still creepy as hell.
I sighed.
Oh, wonderful. Of all the things that survived, those had to make it. Lots of posters made it,
she said.
Which is kind of weird, actually. I've seen burned out buildings that still had unburnt posters in them, and hey, I've heard jokes that the ghost of Pinkie Pie goes up around putting them up again.
She laughed. Until she realized that I wasn't. I was staring off into space, thinking until She finally spoke up again.
What?
I blinked, refocusing.
Sorry. I was just thinking. Miss Pye was a bit of an enigmatic figure. From the stories I've heard of her, that story is just... It's just the edge of plausibility. What?
She repeated, almost stumbling.
Seriously? I just figured ponies were redecorating or something. She was a strange one,
I said.
From what I've heard, even her lifelong friends couldn't understand her. I know, she had the most peculiar manifestations of Earth Pony magic, to the point that she would just intuitively know things. I've heard she discovered an infiltrator from another hive because she got an itch, and she ran Equestria's counter-spying efforts, so we paid a lot of attention to her. Still, we mostly knew old stories and rumors, and I don't know which ones to believe. Coming back from death as a poster-planting spirit wouldn't be the strangest thing I've heard attributed to her. Wow.
Starlight stared off into space for a moment before shuddering.
Luna, those posters were creepy enough before I knew that. What if they're true and she's still watching us?
Sickle called back.
We'll just have to give the bitch a good show then. Oh, ha ha.
Starlight said before looking back to me.
So, what kind of stories did you hear? Plenty. She was a very public figure, helped save Equestria a few times, bore one of the elements of harmony, you know, that kind of thing. Many of the stories were historically documented events, while others are just rumors. For example, we'd hear weird rumors, like her being in 2 places at once, or vanishing if you weren't looking right at her. Which all seemed impossible, but then we have stories that we know were true, such as how she defeated one of Nightmare Moon's plots by singing and laughing. Huh.
Starlight walked along in silence for several seconds before speaking again.
So, how does that exactly work?
I considered that for a few moments, and then I moved a hoof, turning to the Pip-Buck screen.
Well...
A fair portion of the day was spent telling tales of the Ministry Mares, slowly branching out into other celebrities and even into bits of the war in daily life. Starlight found it surprising to hear that my pony job in Appaloosa had been that of a shipping clerk. Though, after a moment of consideration, she said it was easy to picture me doing that. Dusty cleverly noted that it let me keep tabs on material shipped through the area, even if it was unlikely to be terribly useful information to my hive. Such seemingly insignificant details could contribute to a better understanding of complex situations. All in all, the scattered stories made our travels less tedious, filling the time as we crossed the last of the rougher hills south of Rust and into the increasingly flat desert beyond. The next morning, we made our way down to the shallow draw of an ancient, dry stream and emerged into a broad, flat basin. On the far horizon, barely visible in the overcast gloom, was the hazy sight of the hills that marked the edge of the Badlands. Between them and us lay dozens of miles of mostly flat terrain, all dry earth cluttered with scattered shrubs. We caught the glint of metal almost 10 minutes before we finally drew near its source. A chain-link fence lay across our path, stretching from the far end of our sight in either direction. It had fallen over in several places. The metal signs attached to it every couple of 100 yards or so were all worn and rusted. But the large letters declaring it to be the property of the Equestrian army were clearly visible, as were the warnings of extreme danger and the use of lethal force to prevent trespassing. Fortunately, the warnings were about 200 years out of date. Dusty read over the nearby signs as we angled for a gap in the fence. "What is this place?"
It's an Equestrian Army military testing ground,
I said.
The Pale Sand spell range.
Dusty's ears pinned back, while Starlight asked,
What did they test here? Mega spells.
In what was perhaps a little morbidly dramatic, I added,
This is where Equestria practiced the end of the world.
"I've heard of this place before," Dusty said, eyes sweeping along the horizon. "It's supposed to be dangerous. I guess scavengers would go in, hoping to find some old military equipment, and most of them never made it out. Traders avoid the area. Maybe raiders. Maybe something worse.
Probably old military robots,
Starlight said. Sickle merely chuckled.
Sounds good. The trip's been boring as shit.
Just keep your eyes out, Dusty said. That includes you, Whisper. I want you glassing the horizon regularly. We might even take advantage of those wings and send you on some recon flights. He looked me over. The black stands out a bit. Can you shapeshift into something that blends in a bit better?
I could,
I said, with a tone that made it clear I'd rather not.
But shapeshifting takes a fair amount of energy, and I'm running pretty low. I'd prefer to conserve what little I have left.
Starlight's ears perked up.
You're still low on, magic?
I nodded. Starlight chewed on her lip for a moment, and then she turned, clambering up the side of the wagon beside me. I was about to ask what she was doing when she grabbed me in a tight hug, burying her head beside mine. I stiffened in surprise, but slowly relaxed and even chuckled softly as I looped my forelegs around her.
It doesn't quite work that way, but thank you. Try making out!
Sickle called back.
Some good fucking should get the love flowing. And it definitely does not work that way!
I replied as Starlight drew back, trying to hide a blush.
Sorry,
Starlight said.
I just... you know... I don't want you to starve or anything. I appreciate it.
I said, offering a smile.
Though that concern for my health should do enough on its own. I won't be able to do much magic, but at least I can survive off what I'm getting from you and Sickle.
Her head drew back with an expression of skepticism that bordered on distaste, as if the thought itself was going to dirty her.
Sickle?
I shrugged and sighed.
Yeah, for some reason she likes me now. Go figure. Huh.
Starlight looked at the heavily armored mare ahead of us.
I guess you impressed her with that fight near Mereford. Oh, yeah,
Sickle said.
I'm all super impressed with how she shot a bunch of ponies in the back like a cowardly little bitch. Woo!
Starlight frowned.
Or she's an erratic psychopath, and we shouldn't bother trying to figure out what she likes. Oh, that's easy,
Sickle replied.
I like long romantic walks in the desert, and ice cream.
Even though I found her sarcasm distasteful, a reply came to mind that I could not resist.
And pineapple. Oh, fuck yeah,
Sickle said, and though she didn't look back, I had no doubt she was grinning.
Pineapple is awesome.
Even Starlight chuckled a bit at that, though she made a visible effort to resist. She quickly tried to turn back the subject.
So, is that why you haven't shapeshifted? I thought you wanted to look like a normal pony in case we came across any pony. I'm just conserving my energy,
I said.
I'll change before we meet any pony, but for now, I'll take advantage of no longer needing to hide myself from you.
I reached up with a hoof, pulling at the edge of my new attire.
Though, I'm glad I got this cloak to conceal myself within. After so many years of hiding what I am, I'm feeling a little bit exposed.
She slowly nodded.
Still, if you're that, hungry, isn't there anything that we can do? Yeah, a vacation might help,
I said, smiling a little, and then shrugged.
Otherwise, not really. Time together should do enough. Anything else would be either manipulative or unpleasant. How so?
I frowned a little, but I didn't allow my hesitation with the subject to keep me silent.
Manipulative would be trying to steer a conversation towards a topic that would draw out feelings of love for something or some pony, which would let me feed on it. Something like your mother.
Her ears flicked back.
Unpleasant would be forcefully feeding. It's a practice my hive frowns upon in all, but the most dire circumstances. It basically amounts to reaching in and pulling out a pony's magic, but it's unpleasant. It's probably insufficient. It's emotionally torturing the pony. It's literally ripping the love out of them.
Starlight sat there, silently, her gaze lowering to her hooves, meandering around for a few moments before fixing on her pitbuck, laid out before us. She got up to move, but rather than leaving, She sided up and laid beside me, close enough that her soft coat brushed against my carapace. One forehoof reached out, lightly brushing against the Pip-Buck's case.
My mother inherited this from her own mother,
she said, her voice quiet.
It's been passed down from mother to daughter, ever since my great-great-grandmother left Stable 63. Each of them left diaries and notes and recordings. The map is dotted with markers showing where they've been, and some nights my mom and I would sit down and she would read some of her mother's stories to me, or we'd listen to some music on it, or...
She paused and then pulled out a set of earbuds in her magic. One end plugged into the Pip-Buck. The 2 earbuds floated between us, with one offered to me. I accepted it and we each slipped our respective earbud into an ear. Starlight flicked through the menus, then hit play. I recognized the music with the first few notes, even before Sweetie Belle started to sing. It was one of her more recent pieces, slow and soft in tone, but full of emotion. I don't remember the words, but I remember the tune, and I remember the feelings. And there was sadness, and there was worry, but also a sense of hope that made the song beautiful to my ears. To hear it now, it just as clearly and perfect as the song had been 2 centuries ago was wonderfully surreal, as if time was truly as recent as my own memories made it seem. That hope carried a bittersweet undertone when I realized that she had probably died, along with the millions of other ponies who had perished in the apocalypse. Even if her position in Stapletech had allowed her to survive the mega spells, she would have still died well over a century ago. The song ended, and Starlight took a deep breath, slowly letting it out. Her eyes were watering.
There's a bunch of faster-paced songs that I really like, but this one's always been my favorite. My mom would play it for me anytime I asked her, even just to cheer me up. I haven't listened to it since she died.
A moment later, she was tapping the buttons again, navigating through the directories. One was a list of names. I only recognized the last 2, Starlight and Midnight. Above them were Nova, Firelight, and Dusk. She selected Midnight, and a list of files appeared, sorted by date. She opened the first file, 20-something years old. The voice that came across the earbud was almost indistinguishable from Starlight. Midnight's voice was thick with emotion, as if she had been crying recently, though she spoke with a sure confidence.
I don't know who you are yet. I don't know what I'll name you, or what you're like. I just know that I love you, and I can't wait to get to know you.
The recording ended, and Starlight sniffled.
She recorded that 3 years before I was born. It's like she knew.
There was so much love. There was even a strong undercurrent of affection for me, but even though I couldn't sense it in the same way I could sense love, I knew there was also a great sadness. I reached up a foreleg, slipping it around her shoulders, and gave a firm squeeze. She was enduring some very strong emotions for my sake. She leaned into the hug, then wiped at her eyes.
Were you close with Ephema? Not as close as you were with your own mother, I think. Our duties kept us apart, and there were so many of us for her to care for.
I gave her a weak smile.
But I loved her, and I know she loved us. She always found little ways to show it.
I blinked, finding that I had teared up a little at the memory. Starlight noticed too, and nudged me lightly with her shoulders.
Hey, don't cry. Creepy bug monsters shouldn't cry,
she said, a fragile smile that betrayed a fear that I wouldn't appreciate the joke. I chuckled softly and she relaxed.
Hey now,
I said, smiling.
If you think I'm all weird and creepy, imagine what it was like for me coming to Equestria. All you ponies with their squishy hides and garish colors, and hair everywhere, getting into everything. It was a nightmare.
She giggled, wiping her eyes again.
Okay, the hair can be a little annoying at times, but hey, we're not all garish. True, I said, giving another squeeze before releasing her. You're a rather soothing shade of dark blue. It's a lot better than all the pinks and purples and rainbows everywhere. Hey!
Sickle called back.
What the fuck is wrong with pink? It was a bit excessive,
I said.
though I guess it's not quite as ever-present now as it was back then. There's nothing wrong with pink.
Sickle grumbled.
Besides, all the best parts are pink. Ignoring that,
Starlight said before nudging me again.
I guess you've kinda got a cool black and armored look going for you.
Her smile faltered.
Though it kind of reminds me of those Enclave goons. No offense.
I shook my head.
Glossy black and solidly colored eyes? Yeah, I understand what you mean. In fact, I heard rumors that the Pegasus power armor was inspired by changelings. There was some talk that Rainbow Dash had some sort of fascination with changelings, for better or worse, which might have influenced their design. They were a collaboration between the Ministry of Awesome and Image.
Starlight tilted her head, looking curiously at me.
Fascination, huh? Yeah. Well, depending on the rumor you listen to. She was either fascinated with our ability to shapeshift for personal reasons, focused on practicality and our possible utility as spies for Equestria, or secretly wanted to exterminate our entire species. I have no clue which, if any, was true. Huh.
She looked down at my chest and reached out and prodded me. Naturally, my harder outer shell didn't give like a flesh wound.
So, is that like armor then? How much protection does it give? Not as much as I would like,
I said, giving a wry smile.
That wasn't so much of a concern in the past, but given the amount of firefights I've gotten into since waking up here, I think my priorities have changed.
I tapped my own hoof against my chest, producing a soft clopping sound.
A changeling's exoskeleton is good protection against minor cuts, abrasions, and bruises, but that's about it. It might help a little if some pony tries to kick me, but I don't think it would even slow down a bullet.
Starlight blinked, a hint of unease coloring her expression.
Exoskeleton. That's just weird. It's just as weird going the other way,
I said, chuckling a little.
I remember, the first time I took an endoskeleton form, I was 4, I think? I freaked out. It was weird enough feeling parts jiggling every time I moved. And somehow I got this absurd idea that I'd messed up my transformation and I was melting. But the weirdest part? Feeling the bones inside of me. I could press against the squishy, possibly melting parts and feel something solid under them, moving along within me. That freaked me out, like there was something alien, just some alien thing inside of my body trying to tear its way out. I had nightmares for a week.
Starlight responded to my childhood trauma by falling back against the heap of supplies and laughing. To be fair, I chuckled a bit at my own expense as well. Her laughter faded, eventually ending in a long sigh.
Oh, that's kinda creepy.
I gave another chuckle and shrugged.
You get used to some weirdness when you can change shape at will.
Lying on her back, Starlight stared up at the gray, overcast sky, lost in thought for a moment.
I could see advantages to that.
After a moment of silence, I added a bit more to my story.
So, the other reason I remembered the whole event was because of Ephema. She took the time to comfort me, to assure me that everything was okay. She must have had many other responsibilities that she needed to attend to, but she made time. She made time to care for me.
Starlight smiled, still looking up at the clouds. The silence lingered on for several seconds before Dusty spoke up. I really hate to be that guy and break up the mood, but if Star's right about the robots, we need to keep an eye out. Starlight groaned.
Dusty. No, he's right,
I said.
Duty first.
I gave her a smile.
We can always talk more later.
She sighed but relented. She stood and moved to the edge of the wagon, but I raised a hoof to stop her before she hopped off.
Starlight,
I said, keeping my voice low.
Thank you. Thank you for what you did, but I can live off what I've been able to get. You don't need to hurt yourself to just help me.
She hesitated, finally shrugging.
It's nothing. It's nothing. I just wanted to help.
I watched her fidget for a couple of seconds before giving her a soft smile, which, in retrospect, was probably not quite as effective with my natural set of teeth.
Well, I do appreciate it. So, thank you.
She wavered a moment before replying.
Hey, that's what friends are for, right?
My smile grew, and she flashed a smile my way before hopping down. I sat back in the wagon, lifting my binoculars and scanning the horizon.